Before this video begins, I want to emphasize that none of this is meant to attack anyone or say that they're wrong, or to target any one theory or theorist. This video is meant to be my thoughts on what I see as a growing trend within the FNaF community, and why I think it's not the way we should be going about theory crafting and solving. I'm not going to mention any creators in this video by name, because I know that some of you are little monsters, who will then try to harass them. I'm putting my foot down now, don't do that. If you're one of those people who tags a theorist on Twitter just to bully or insult them, rather than actually contribute or provide constructive criticism, then I do not like you. I mean, some of these people I would consider friends, and all of them have my respect. With that being said, let's talk about what I have been seeing in the theory crafting community as of late. Picture this. You're looking for a new theory regarding Five Nights at Freddy's security breach and its DLC, Ruin. You click on the most recent video from insert theorist name here, and what is it? It's a video about how Toy Chica is actually Glamrock Chica because both of them lose their beaks at one point. And this is why Scott decided to make that whole thing about why would the tiny Toy Chica be missing her beak. It was teasing security breach all along. You think, that seems wrong. So you click on another from insert another theorist name here. This one is all about how Security Breach is actually a retelling of a specific Star Trek episode from the 80s, which means that the next main villain is going to be Q. That also seems wrong. Then you click on another video from yet another different theorist, and this one is about how Circus Baby is actually coming back to life and running for US Governor of Pennsylvania. Oh, and also Charlie is there. Do you see the problem here? Now, I use totally ludicrous examples, but in my eyes, these are only loosely detached from reality, as many FNaF theorists now are exhibiting the same problem, looking far, far too into things. Now, what does this constitute? How far is too far? And what specific nitpicks do I have? Well, let's get started. When it comes to old FNaF theorizing, for a while, creators had really hit a sweet spot, especially in the eras of FNaF 2 and 3. During this time, theorists were given enough to work with and plenty more to figure out on their own. Most theorists were able to arrive to similar conclusions with a little difference between them. One thing was for sure though, Phone Guy was the killer and he's Springtrap. Case closed. Then we hit FNaF 4 and things kinda changed. The game started introducing contradictory information. The teasers had all indicated this was going to be a Bite of 87 story, but then the game came out and gave us 83. There was debate, was this 87 or 83? What's the purpose of the nightmares? Who was the crying child? And things only got worse from there. Then came the Silver Eyes, Sister Location, Pizza Sim, Fazbear Frights, and then the mother of all theory-crushing games, Help Wanted. Suddenly, every theory ever was thrown into contention because Help Wanted made it clear that what was happening in those games was not necessarily one-to-one with reality. They couldn't be trusted anymore, at least not completely. And then came Security Breach, the first FNaF game to take place in the quote-unquote real world of the series. We got to see bits and pieces of the series past while also being opened up to this brand new story that was sort of about Vanny, but not really. Anyway, this was when theory crafting kinda started to nosedive, if you ask me. Why? Well, first off, too many sources of information. We had a novel trilogy under our belt, 7 games before the soft reboot, and 2 short story series running under Security Breach, with Tales from the Pizzaplex starting up pretty much as soon as Fazbear Frights ended. The question then became, what sources are valid? Are all of them valid? Just the games? What's useful information, and what's not? If you want my opinion, when trying to solve Security Breach and Help Wanted specifically, stick to any content that's associated specifically with this era. So that would be those 2 games, as well as AR, and the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, since those were specifically written to enlighten us on this current era of FNaF. Anyway, the other big notch that took the steam out of theorizing is what I'd like to call theory cannibalism. What this is when you make one theory, and the next theory you make uses that one as a basis, over and over again until you're so far detached from the real story of the games it's hardly recognizable. Sticking to my rule about not mentioning any one creator's name, I do want to point out that there was a timeline released not too long ago, and by the end of it I was completely confused because the individual making it had never mentioned Vanny once. They mentioned Vanessa, sure, but they never mentioned Vanny, what her role in Security Breach was, or why it was important that she presents herself as Vanny. Instead, this theorist was making it sound like Vanessa wore a clown costume and called herself Elizabeth Afton. Theory cannibalism can mostly be chalked up to theorists gotta theorize, and FNaF content is not coming out like it used to. Scott Cawthon would make a full game every few months, but as it stands, Security Breach is a couple years old now and its DLC came just a little while ago. We're getting Help Wanted 2 this year as well, but for that in-between chunk, there was little to go off of other than the books. These books, which by the way, theorists either refuse to use or used in ways that I would say are probably not intended. I never want to hear the word parallel again, let me tell you. So, what has been the result? Well, for starters, half the fandom thinks that a character who hasn't been mentioned by name since 2017 is coming back. Elizabeth Afton, the girl who was killed by William Afton's creation, Circus Baby, and would go on to possess her, before ultimately being destroyed in the Pizza Place fire by Henry. Since then, she's appeared in Ultimate Custom Night, Help Wanted, and FNaF AR, all of which are what I would call celebration titles, meant to look back on this series, none of which she had a leading role in. There's no evidence to suggest that she's still around, and yet now more than ever are people seemingly expecting her to be there somewhere. Like, I'm sorry, we didn't even get Afton back technically. What makes you think we're getting his daughter? I think Baby coming back is genuinely the worst kind of theory I regularly hear. If only because every time I hear it explained for me, it never addresses my main concern. That being that her coming back makes no sense for the story now. It works fine without her. For all we know, Elizabeth Afton may never have even existed based on the reboot status. It's hard to come up with proof as to why Elizabeth wouldn't exist in the news stories because that would be proving a negative, but let me explain why her coming back would be the most terrible storytelling decision Scott has ever made as a writer. Because there's been no buildup. Like I said, she hasn't been mentioned by name since 2017, let alone had a physical appearance in Security Breach. We saw plush babies and cardboard cutouts, but these are never called out or commented on, and the plush babies can be completely missed on a standard playthrough. And despite plush babies even being there, those still don't really count as evidence that she's still around, given that many characters have their own plush toys in Security Breach, including characters who never actually appear in the game like Funtime Foxy. I've said it before and I'll say it again, it would take a lot for me to believe an old lore character is still around. Now let's talk about another old lore character, Nightmarian. Guys, I gotta tell you, it's not that deep. A while back, a video was made explaining why the creator of it believed Nightmarian to be the FNaF series representation of Death or the Grim Reaper. It's a charming video, and although I'm not sure if I agree with it completely, I do think it's a pretty cool video, and definitely a fun way to interpret the series and that specific character. The problem? Well, in Security Breach, there are a ton of quote-unquote hidden Nightmarian plush toys, as well as several staff bots appearing with Nightmarian-inspired coats of paint. To which I say, so? What difference does it make? In my opinion, the reason these Nightmarian plushes are spread about the game, as well as them actually being called Nightmare plushes, is being they are just supposed to represent spookiness and creepiness or whatever. I mean, if they can't be bothered to even get the character's name right, are they really meant to be that important of a character? They're another set of eyes following you around, even if they don't necessarily mean anything. I mean, if they did, wouldn't that mean Little Joe or the bobbleheads or the cupcake in previous games meant something? Not really. As for the staff bots, well, the original ones look like the puppet, so in order to distinguish them from the originals, I can totally see Vanny doing them up like this just to make it clear that these ones are the dark and evil versions. That might sound like a stretch, but is it any stretchier than these two characters to suddenly be back after years of not even a hint of them returning? I think the absolute worst of it, however, surrounds the newest antagonist. Somehow, several theorists have come to what I can say is one of the most interesting consensus surrounding the character of the Mimic. Namely, that its identity that we learn from the books is completely false, and it is instead a robot version of Charlotte, aka the puppet, and Circus Baby. Why? Because its endoskull kinda looks like Baby's? It really doesn't, but I'm trying to hear this one out. The belief currently is that the Mimic was built to mimic Charlotte, but was stolen and corrupted by Afton, where it was turned into Baby, and then something happened and now it's here at the Pizzaplex. There are a couple issues with this though, namely that the books actually tell us what the Mimic is, no theorizing required. A case could be made that the Mimic at one point in time may have seen Baby and then it starts mimicking her, but that hasn't happened yet, so why are we putting so much stock into this one being the answer? And it's based off a book series that the majority of FNaF fans that I know tend to not really like. Some of the most major theorists in the scene right now are convinced that this is the way the story will go, and this is the direction of the character. But let's take a step back and see what's really being said here. Scott Cawthon writes a trilogy of books, the last two of which are pretty much critical bombs, with many readers being dissatisfied and even annoyed, especially at that last book, The Fourth Closet. The reveal of the main character being one of 4 robots just didn't sit well with audiences. And here's the thing. Based on the Daco interview, this is exactly what Scott would have learned. He said before that anytime he makes one of these games, he focuses on the big criticisms and tries to correct them in the next game. It's why FNaF 4's jump scares are so good compared to FNaF 3's. So let's assume that this time, Scott just didn't care and held on to this kid robot idea all the way up until Security Breach. This is when Scott finally implements this idea. But wait, now's a good time to retcon. As it turns out, Baby, who before this was her own completely separate character, is now actually the Mimic, an endoskeleton who mimics what it sees and hears. And it was at first made to mimic Charlie. Why? Doesn't matter why, I guess, lol, since Charlie dies. The Mimic Baby is now both part Elizabeth Afton, part Charlotte Emily, and part everything else it seems. It then becomes Ennard, splits apart and becomes Scrap Baby, and then it simply pretends that the Pizza Sim fire never happened and manages to survive. Now it's the Mimic, an amalgamation of Baby, Charlotte, and William is also in there somewhere. Oh, and Burn Trap never existed, that part's important. In fact, this makes total sense when you consider Tiger Rock. You see, Tiger Rock has blue and green eyes. Blue represents the bad and green represents the good. Why? Well, Charlotte, who inexplicably has brown eyes, was associated with the color green one time, which means she represents the green eyes. Then Elizabeth, a character who actually has green eyes, represents the blue because Baby's original eye color was blue. Never mind the fact that when Elizabeth possessed her, her eyes turned fucking green. But this makes total and complete sense, especially if you don't read the books that tell us everything I just said is wrong. After all, those aren't canon, right? Well, actually, they are canon, but only kind of. They're canon enough that I'm right. You see, the Mimic is in the books. It has its origin explained here. It was in the basement in the books, and it's in the basement now. However, this is a red herring. You see, Scott would never be so straightforward with his storytelling or explaining things. This is instead a parallel. Edwin didn't make the Mimic, Henry did. Sure, there's no proof of this outside of the most circumstantial evidence imaginable, but imagine if there was. Wouldn't I be so right about this? Whew. Anyway, that's the end of my little episode I had there. In the end, I don't think I could ever explain what's wrong with theorizing better than the only Mr. Hippo. And while he explains that, let me just thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
I said to him, Orville, not every story has to have significance, you know? Sometimes a story is just a story. If you try to read into every little thing and find meaning in everything anyone says, you'll just drive yourself crazy. I had a friend do it once. Wasn't pretty. We talked about it for years. And not only that, but you'll likely end up believing something you shouldn't believe and thinking something you shouldn't think, or assuming something you shouldn't assume, you know? Sometimes, I said, a story is just a story. So just be quiet for 1 second of your life and eat your sandwich, okay?